Have you ever noticed that as people get older, their visitors start to disappear? Friends stop calling, family visits become rare, and suddenly, the house that was once full of life feels empty. But why does this happen? Is it just a part of aging, or is there something deeper going on? The truth is, after 65, most people unknowingly push others away without realizing it. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see loneliness forever. Loneliness after 65 isn't just a feeling, it's a silent killer. Studies show that social isolation increases the risk of dementia by 50%, heart disease by 29%, and even early death. In fact, experts say chronic loneliness is as harmful as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And yet, millions of people unknowingly fall into this trap, watching their social circle shrink without understanding why. The worst part? Most of them don't talk about it. They suffer in silence, assuming it's just a normal part of aging. But it doesn't have to be this way. If you've noticed fewer visitors in your own life, or if someone you love seems more withdrawn, stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand the hidden reasons behind this painful reality and, more importantly, what you can do to stop it. One of the biggest reasons people stop visiting after 65 is something most never think about: mobility challenges. As we age, even the simplest tasks become harder. Climbing stairs feels exhausting, standing for too long causes discomfort, and preparing for guests becomes overwhelming. It's not that people don't want visitors, it's that the effort required to host them starts to feel like too much. Think about it. When you were younger, inviting friends over was easy. You'd tidy up, set the table, maybe even cook a meal. But now, just getting out of a chair takes more effort than it used to. For many older adults, the idea of having company brings more anxiety than excitement. Take Margaret, for example. She was once the heart of every family gathering, always cooking, laughing, making sure everyone felt at home. But after her hip replacement at 72, everything changed. She found herself declining invitations, telling people she was fine on her own, even though deep down, she missed the company. Why? Because she didn't want them to see her struggling. She didn't want the embarrassment of asking for help just to get up from the couch. And so, little by little, the visits stopped. This is more common than you think. Studies show that limited mobility leads to increased social isolation, and isolation accelerates both physical and mental decline. It's a vicious cycle. The less people move, the harder it becomes to stay active, and the harder it is to socialize. But here's the question: how many people do you know who are going through this right now? Maybe it's a parent, a neighbor, or even yourself. Have you ever avoided inviting people over because it felt like too much effort? If so, you're not alone. But here's the good news: there are ways to break this cycle, and it starts with one simple change. Second, people stop visiting after 65 because of gradual hearing and vision loss. It happens so slowly that many don't even realize how much it affects their social life. Imagine sitting at a family gathering, but instead of following the conversation, all you hear is a blur of voices blending together. Background noise makes it worse, and trying to keep up becomes exhausting. At first, you ask people to repeat themselves, but after a while, you just start nodding and pretending to understand. Socializing turns into a struggle, and soon, it feels easier to stay home. This happened to Bob, a retired teacher who used to love chatting with his grandkids. But as his hearing declined, conversations became frustrating. He felt embarrassed asking them to repeat things, so he started avoiding phone calls and family gatherings. His kids thought he was becoming distant, but in reality, he just didn't want them to see him struggling. Over time, the invitations stopped, not because his family didn't love him, but because they assumed he wasn't interested. Vision loss creates a similar issue. When people can't clearly see faces or read expressions, it makes conversations harder. They worry about missing important visual cues, feeling awkward, or not recognizing someone they should know. Instead of facing that discomfort, they slowly retreat from social life. The worst part? Research shows that untreated hearing loss is directly linked to cognitive decline and dementia. The brain needs constant stimulation, and when it stops processing conversations, it starts to weaken, just like an unused muscle. But here's the real question: how many people do you know who are withdrawing from social life, not because they want to, but because their world is becoming harder to hear and see? Maybe it's a parent, a friend, or even you. If so, what's the first step in breaking free from this silent isolation? Third, people stop visiting after 65 because their closest friends start to disappear. As the years go by, the social circle that once felt full of life begins to shrink. Some friends move away to be closer to family, others develop health problems that keep them home, and some, painfully, pass away. What happens next? The phone stops ringing as often, invitations become rare, and the days grow quieter. At first, you don't think much of it, you tell yourself it's just life. But then you realize that the people who used to check in on you, the ones who made plans and kept you engaged, are no longer there. This happened to Nancy, a 74-year-old woman who once had a standing coffee date with her best friend, Carol, every Tuesday for over 30 years. They talked about everything, family, memories, even their aches and pains, but one day, Carol had a stroke. She survived, but everything changed. Her speech became slurred, she stopped driving, and the coffee date stopped. Nancy still went to the cafe for a while, hoping to run into someone, but as time passed, she started going less and less. She didn't want to sit there alone, feeling the absence of what once was. Losing friends isn't just an emotional burden, it has real health consequences. Studies show that seniors with fewer social connections have a 45% higher risk of early death. Loneliness increases stress, weakens the immune system, and even raises blood pressure. And yet, when someone loses a close friend, they often withdraw instead of reaching out. It's not that they don't want new connections, it's that they don't know where to start. So here's the question: how many people in your life have stopped socializing simply because they've lost the people who made life feel full? Maybe it's a neighbor who used to be active but now rarely leaves the house. Maybe it's you. And if it is, what's the first step in breaking the cycle? Fourth, people stop visiting after 65 because they start to feel like a burden. It's not that they don't want to see friends and family, it's that they convince themselves others are too busy, too tired, or simply no longer interested. This feeling doesn't happen overnight. It builds up over time, fueled by small moments, a canceled visit, a rushed phone call, a family gathering where they felt like an afterthought. Instead of asking to see their loved ones, they begin to withdraw, telling themselves they'll come when they have time. But time passes, and the visits grow fewer. Take Richard, for example. He was once the center of his family, hosting barbecues, helping his kids with home projects, and always making himself available. But as the years went on, things changed. His children had their own families, their own responsibilities, and visits became less frequent. He didn't want to complain, he understood they had busy lives. So, when weeks went by without a call, he told himself, I don't want to bother them. He stopped reaching out, hoping they would call first. But they assumed he was fine. After all, he never asked for company. This mindset is more dangerous than it seems. Research shows that seniors who feel like a burden are at a significantly higher risk of depression. They start eating less, moving less, and isolating themselves, which leads to faster physical and cognitive decline. The irony. Most family members don't even realize it's happening. They assume their aging loved one enjoys their alone time when, in reality, they are quietly hoping someone will check in. So here's the real question: how often do we assume someone is okay just because they don't say otherwise? Have you ever thought about calling someone but told yourself, they're probably busy? Maybe it's time to stop waiting for an invitation and be the one to reach out first. Because for someone over 65, that small gesture might mean everything. Fifth, people stop visiting after 65 because of something no one ever expects: depression and emotional withdrawal. It doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes, it looks like exhaustion, like declining invitations, like saying, I'm fine, don't worry about me. But inside, something changes. The spark that once made socializing enjoyable starts to fade. Conversations feel draining, outings feel overwhelming, and soon, isolation becomes the easier choice. Not because they want to be alone, but because they don't have the energy to do anything else. This happened to George, a 76-year-old man who used to be the life of every gathering. He had a routine, hobbies, and a calendar full of things to do. But after his wife passed away, everything felt different. At first, people checked in, invited him over, tried to keep him engaged. But over time, the calls slowed down, and George started saying no more often than yes. He wasn't angry or upset, just tired. Tired of making small talk, tired of pretending he was okay, tired of feeling like he had nothing left to contribute. His kids assumed he wanted space, his friends thought he needed time, and little by little, his world became smaller. Depression in older adults is often overlooked. Many assume it's just part of aging, but the truth is, it's a silent thief. It steals motivation, weakens the body, and speeds up cognitive decline. Studies show that loneliness and depression are as deadly as obesity or smoking. But here's the scariest part, most people who suffer from it never say a word. They don't ask for help. They just disappear. So the question is, how many people in your life are slowly fading into isolation right now? A parent, a neighbor, maybe even you. And if so, what can be done before it's too late? Sixth, people stop visiting after 65 because life simply moves on without them. It's not that their loved ones stop caring, it's that priorities shift, schedules fill up, and without realizing it, older relatives and friends become less of a presence in everyday life. At first, it's subtle. A son who used to call every weekend now calls once a month. A best friend who used to visit often now only sends holiday cards. A neighbor who used to drop by for coffee now waves from a distance. No one means to drift away, but it happens. And for those left behind, the silence grows louder with each passing year. This happened to Linda, a 71-year-old woman who spent decades taking care of everyone, her children, her husband, even her aging parents. She was always the one planning family dinners, remembering birthdays, and making sure everyone stayed connected. But as she got older, the roles reversed. Her kids had their own children, her husband passed away, and suddenly, no one was checking in on her the way she had always checked in on them. She told herself they were busy, that they would come when they had time. But deep down, she wondered, had she become invisible? Studies show that social neglect in older adults leads to higher stress levels, weaker immune systems, and even a shorter lifespan. Humans are wired for connection, and when that connection fades, the body and mind start to suffer. The cruelest part? Most people who feel forgotten never speak up. They don't want to seem needy, so they wait. They wait for a call, for a visit, for someone to remember. And sometimes, that wait never ends. So here's the question, how many people do we assume are fine just because they don't ask for attention? How often do we tell ourselves we'll visit soon but never do? And if there's someone in your life you haven't checked on in a while, what's stopping you from doing it right now? Seventh, people stop visiting after 65 because of something unexpected. The older you get, the harder it becomes to feel like you belong. Social groups change, conversations shift, and suddenly, the world feels like it's moving too fast. Technology, trends, even the way people communicate, it all evolves, and before you know it, you start feeling like an outsider in your own life. It's not just about physical aging, it's about feeling disconnected from the world around you. And that feeling, it makes people withdraw, not because they don't want company, but because they don't know how to fit in anymore. This happened to Walter, a 78-year-old man who had always been social. He loved meeting people, going to community events, even keeping up with the news. But over time, things changed. Conversations became harder to follow, everyone was talking about things he didn't understand. People his age were either moving away or passing on, and the younger generation seemed to live in a different world. They talked about things he didn't relate to, used slang he didn't recognize, and spent more time on their phones than in real conversation. One day, at a family dinner, he realized he had barely spoken the entire evening. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know what to say. This feeling isn't rare. Studies show that as people age, they experience something called social displacement. The world doesn't stop changing just because someone reaches 65, and for many, that change feels overwhelming. Younger generations communicate differently, texting instead of calling, socializing online instead of in person. The places where older adults once felt comfortable, churches, community centers, local cafes, start to disappear, replaced by things designed for younger crowds. Little by little, they stop trying to keep up. They stop going to events. They stop calling. Not because they want to be alone, but because they don't want to feel like they don't belong. And the worst part? The longer someone stays in isolation, the harder it becomes to rejoin the world. A few missed invitations turn into months of silence. A little discomfort turns into deep loneliness. And eventually, it no longer feels worth the effort to reach out. The mind starts to slow, confidence fades, and without realizing it, they've disappeared from social life entirely. But here's the question: how often do we assume someone prefers to be alone when, in reality, they just don't know how to reconnect? How many parents, grandparents, or old friends are sitting at home, waiting for an invitation they're too afraid to ask for? And more importantly, what if one simple conversation could change everything? And then, one day, the visits stop completely. No more phone calls. No more unexpected knocks on the door. No more invitations. The world keeps moving, but for those left behind, time starts to feel different, longer, emptier, quieter. The silence that once felt peaceful now feels unbearable. And the worst part? It didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, over years, in ways no one noticed. A cancelled lunch. A missed birthday call. A family gathering where no one really sat down to talk. Picture this: an elderly man sits by the window, watching the street outside. Every morning, he looks out, hoping to see a familiar face, hoping today will be the day someone remembers. The mailbox stays empty. The phone remains silent. He tells himself he's fine, that he's used to it. But deep down, he wonders, does anyone even notice he's still here? Or imagine an old woman sitting in her favorite chair, staring at a dusty photo album. The faces in the pictures feel so close, but in reality, they are worlds away. She picks up her phone, scrolls through her contacts, but doesn't dial. They're probably busy. That's what she tells herself. What she doesn't realize is that the people in her life think the same thing. She's probably fine. She'll call if she needs anything. But she won't. She doesn't want to be a burden. This is how it happens. This is how people disappear from each other's lives without meaning to. Not because of a fight. Not because of something dramatic. Just life. Life getting in the way. And one day, when we finally do think to call, to visit, to reach out, it's too late. So ask yourself, who in your life is sitting by that window right now? Who have you been meaning to call but keep putting off? Because the truth is, you may think you'll have time later. But for them, later may feel like an eternity. And sometimes, later never comes. Loneliness after 65 isn't just sad, it's dangerous. It creeps in slowly, unnoticed, until one day, someone realizes they've spent weeks, maybe months, without a real conversation. And the truth? Most of the time, it's not because people don't care. It's because they assume there's always time, that someone else will reach out first. But waiting is how relationships fade. Waiting is how people disappear from each other's lives. So ask yourself, who in your life might be feeling forgotten right now? A parent, a grandparent, an old friend. When was the last time you checked in, not just with a quick text, but really sat down and listened? Let me know in the comments, who is the one person you're going to reach out to after watching this? And if this video made you think, if you believe more people need to hear this message, then hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes, a simple reminder like this is all it takes to change a life.